When I was a beginner artist, I was determined to create detailed, realistic clay horses, especially with elegant, expressive necks, and I figured it out. Now, I'd love to walk you through my step by step process for sculpting a horse neck in polymer clay while sharing all my tips, materials, and tools. I begin this neck much as I did with the rest of the body, starting with a wire and aluminum foil armature, which gives support for my clay. I am also experimenting with masking tape to help form the armature. I start adding the first layers of clay with the softer beige Super Sculpey, then mixing it with gray Super Sculpey. The gray is firmer, and I find the two mixed gives the perfect consistency for me. I focus on creating the general silhouette of the horse's neck with clay, making sure it looks good from the profile first. I'll add width second. That's kind of the theme of sculpting. Profiles first, width second. I use Sculpey glue to help adhere raw clay to the baked clay. Sculpey glue is a sticky liquid polymer clay that, while it's not actually a glue, when baked it's super strong. So this is like extra adherence insurance. Since I like working over a firm base, I follow the package directions and bake this layer of clay. Is anyone else like that, or do you prefer working with soft clays? I also check to make sure that the neck is about the same length as the head, as this is a general rule of thumb for horse proportions. Speaking of the width, I start by blocking in some bony landmarks, particularly the point of the shoulder and the big vertebrae just behind the head called the atlas. Some substantial muscle groups connect to these bony areas, so blocking these in now is really helpful for future me. If I get these generally in the right place, everything else comes easier. Because they are bony and easy to see underneath the skin, these areas are easy for me to take proportional measurements from later too. That all just makes things easier for me as a realism sculptor. Now I start blocking in the major muscle groups. My process for this has always evolved. I used to start with the trapezius at the base of the neck, near the shoulder. Now I like to start with the throat latch and move on to this major muscle group called the brachiocephalicus, which runs over the point of the shoulder and connects to the atlas. There's so much character in this area and it changes drastically from breed to breed. It also changes from pose to pose, so now I find it easier to start there and kind of get it looking like I want early in the process. By the way, I find it isn't entirely crucial as a beginner artist to know the Latin names of these muscle groups if you're interested in sculpting. I do find it helpful to know the Latin names when searching for more detailed references. Yet, if you already have a good reference, then what I found really important is first remembering what these muscle groups actually look like, and then observing how they change in different poses or from animal to animal. I find it most helpful to observe first, memorize, practice sculpting what I see, and then learn the Latin names as I go so I can find better references. And speaking of good reference for beginners, I found this book, An Atlas of Animal Anatomy for Artists by Ellenberger, is a great starting point for quite a few mammals, especially horses. I also find Anatomy Drawing School Animal a helpful resource. The illustrator's different style is more helpful in seeing the 3D form of the muscles, especially from different angles. The two together are really great. Of Of course, there's lots of other sources, and I have made a video on more art books like these, but I'd also love to hear what other anatomy resources other artists love to use. To continue sculpting the upper neck, I move on to the splenius, taking careful note of how it runs into the brachiocephalicus. I especially note how that looks from different angles in real Mawari horses who have a similar body type to the horse I'm creating. In fact, these two muscle groups tie together so tightly and contort in such interesting ways that, as a beginner, I used to sculpt them from one long noodle of clay and carve away the details I needed. Speaking of carving, I find loop tools are really helpful for making careful adjustments. Other tools I find helpful for shaping and blending the clay are wax carving tools, ball stylus tools, and just my fingers. I keep adding clay, and as I move towards the base of the neck and the wither, I switch from noodly shapes of clay and instead make a triangular shape for the trapezius muscle. Using smaller bits of clay, I fill in a bit of the rhomboideus that was missing from the top line of the neck, mostly where it joins the wither. This area can vary a lot from breed to breed, and I try to make sure I create a sense of that overall thinner look Mawaris have, especially the mares. Mawari horses are one of my favorite breeds, so I have an extra emotional attachment to see if I can recreate in clay what I love about this breed. Do you have a favorite breed of horse? Also, if you're enjoying this, you could pretend the like button is a cute pony snoot to boop. After adjustments, I have the general shape of the neck on this side, and I repeat the block-in process on the other side. I add and take off clay as needed, constantly looking at many references to help guide me in my goal of realism. I think that's something important I've learned about sculpture, especially when ultra-realism is the goal, that being how much of the process is back and forth, or how rough it can look in the beginning. In fact, it can look quite poorly to start, and that's totally fine because the back and forth of adding clay and carving refines it until, oh hey, it's suddenly realistic. And that's the other thing. It can look very rough for 90% of the process, and that last 10% is like I blinked and suddenly it looks nice. That change at the very end is almost magical, and I love that.
Charlotte, you're getting the hang of it. Look at you now, you're doing it. Charlotte, brave enough to admit what you want from the moment. So keep going, kid. The world may not have noticed yet, but I did. Charlotte, it's been a hard month. Noises in the night, we all slept rough. Charlotte, it's beautiful, isn't it? The moon on the rooftops, the silver light drips. Sweet dreams, kid. I hope you find some peace while you're sleeping. Charlotte, you're busy growing quick flowers in the garden. The summer air sticks. Charlotte, you're bleeding at the knees, climbing up the windshield, trying to reach the storm front coming this way. Don't worry about the thunder, it's how the heat breaks. We're all wishing on the rain. Maybe in the downpour things will change.
Another important thing I've learned is the value of rest for the artistic process. I sculpted this horse's neck over the course of many days, taking lots of breaks in between. I took a day-long break after blocking in one side of her neck and another rest day after both sides were blocked in. Part of this is to pace myself, especially as I'm juggling this as a hobby, and most importantly, so I can come back to the project with fresh eyes. Because I've had a break, I can more objectively decide what needs adjustment, and perhaps areas I thought were looking rough, I'll see are totally fine. And that's how I'm learning to avoid overworking things too. If you'd like to see the making of this mare's head, that video is linked below, along with a playlist of my other sculpting projects if you'd like to watch more later. I plan to have more sculpting videos of this mare, so subscribe if you don't want to miss them. Also, you'll get to see my other monthly art projects like sculpting wildlife, painting, my sketchbook, and dipping my toes into landscape art. I'm a multi-passionate artist, so there's lots to explore on my channel.
Another year for the hopeless dreamers, stepping across the Milky Way like stones in a river. The city was frozen, so we went north. January came in the night like a woman scorned. We welcomed her in with a fire in the forest. So stay a while, warm your hands, we're all on our way to coming around again, coming around again.
Now that I'm happy with the block in, I adjust the width after viewing it from many angles, and then I move on to refinement. I'm slowly starting to add some details and texture. This is where the ball stylus starts to shine. To blend, I can push the clay and rake it, which I know sounds counterintuitive to blending, but wait. Look how much it smooths out when I run my gloves over it. It's not perfectly smooth, but neither are real animals. Using the ball stylus and my gloves this way helps create a smooth result that still mimics the texture of real animals and avoids an overly smooth plastic look. This refinement and texturing stage is the longest part of the process, as I make an almost endless series of micro adjustments over the course of many days. It's worth it though. That's looking pretty good. Now I'll switch to smaller ball stylus tools to finish the texture and details. I also use a soft, old paintbrush dipped in a little rubbing alcohol to more precisely soften and blend the areas that need it. This can also soften the clay enough that the brush leaves textures too, and I try to make that work in my favor. All right, time for the results. I'm pretty happy with how this neck turned out, and it's bringing so much life to the sculpture. There's a couple areas to fix, but since I need to reposition this horse's ears, I'll do that later. I'll probably try to film that for a future video as I continue to sculpt this horse. I hope you'll subscribe for the rest of this mare sculpting journey, and feel free to share the videos with a friend. In the meantime, thank you so much for watching, and you might enjoy this next video. Bye!